The number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
Welcome to Spotlight on the Arts. I'm your host, Patrick Cristiano, the publisher of TheaterLife.com, a website for theater buffs in New York City and the Hamptons. We cover Broadway and off-Broadway theater, as well as social events in New York City and out here in the Hamptons. And I'm coming to you from the LTV studio in Wainscott, where I have a special guest, Dr. Ruth Appelhof. The author, an author and art consultant and the former executive director of Guildhall. Thank you, Ruth.
Well, it's a great pleasure being here. This is our second conversation, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, too. We're going to do a little series on a project that Ruth is doing, a book she's writing on Lee Krasner, the artist who was married to Jackson Pollock.
Right.
So when you were here last time, you were just getting off to start doing some interviews.
That's right. In fact, when I was here last time, I was just bragging about my time at the American Academy in Rome and how wonderful that was, bragging that I had 52 pages written already. Well, now I've gotten into the weeds, so to speak, because I thought it shouldn't be a memoir of just my time with Lee Krasner in 1974. It should be a memoir of all the people that I can find that are still alive and still have memories of Lee, to combine it into one book. So I started out interviewing, one or two people, and they led me to various other people. Well, now I have over 50 interviews, and they're wonderful. So I'm more excited about the book than I was last year when we talked.
So you've expanded your horizons about what you want to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think, too, expanded the story, because my story with her, although I did research and interviewed her every single day, but my story was only my point of view, and now I have other people, other points of view, other experiences.
Are you finding that their points of views align with yours, or?
Both, yeah. It's an interesting discrepancy. I mentioned last time that Lee Krasner was pretty tough on me, but she could scream and yell and take umbrage with whatever stupid thing I did. But now that I've talked to so many other people, they all say, oh yeah, she was quite difficult. But interesting to me is that almost every single person has said how much they admired her, even though she did have this kind of personality that was hard to get along with, that they admired what she did, what she accomplished, that she was a tough broad at a time when you had to be tough. So it's turned out to really kind of broaden my perspective on Lee.
Really? So you went about this, and you said you had a series of questions. You asked everybody similar. Did you ask them all the same questions? Or?
Pretty much. I tried to be as generic with the questions as I could, and I'd always start out by finding out about them, which was fascinating because each person, of course, has their own personal story. So that added to the then response that they had when they knew Lee, really had a much richer and deeper meaning, I think. And what happened was that I would actually say to them generic questions like, when did you meet Lee? What did you talk about? Just general, easy questions. And I would always hope, as I did when I interviewed Lee, that they would go off. That they'd say, oh, now wait a minute, I remember this story. Oh, I remember that story. And sure enough, that's what happened. So no matter how general the questions were, the responses are absolutely fascinating.
Now, who are some of the, who would you like to talk about?
Well,
you have so many.
So many,
people
I know.
That you've seen already.
I think I'd like to start out by mentioning Barbara Rose. Barbara Rose.
Who is she?
Well, she's a very famous art historian.
Okay.
Wonderful woman. And she is the one that did the big retrospective of Lee Krasner's work in 1983 at the Houston Museum. She was the curator there. And the show went from Houston to various other museums in the country and then ended up in New York City at MoMA. So you can imagine that Lee Krasner would have, more than anything, her whole life wanted to have this exhibition at MoMA. She, that was her goal. And so talking to Barbara Rose about her curating the show and she also got to know Lee very well. Funny sidebar to my Barbara Rose story is that when I first emailed her and said, I'm doing this book on Lee Krasner, she wrote back and said, why?
Really?
She said, there have been way too many people that have written about Lee Krasner already, and there have been a lot of them. And she said, what can you do that would be new and interesting to people? So I, back and forth with the emails, and finally I wore her down and met her in New York.
So what's new? What's your?
Well, what I could do was bring my own perspective. And of course, that's what's happened with everyone else I've interviewed too. They bring their own perspective. So you get a much more, I think, interesting, intimate portrait
was
of
she
Lee
different
Krasner.
people? Was she different with different people?
Yes.
That's
She was. She liked men a lot. And to tell you the truth, she really liked gay men a lot. So many of her
Why do you think that
friends-
is? I mean,
I guess
besides
that-
feeling safe sexually,
Yeah,
do you think that there was because gay men? When you say gay men, were they artistic gay men or just gay men?
Well, of course, they were all artistic.
So it
they were
wasn't
very
might not-
knowledgeable. I mean, Richard Howard was one of the great poets of all times, and he lived in Lee's house for a couple of years with his close friend, Sanford Friedman. So when I interviewed Richard Howard, who I think is over 80 years old, he told me beautiful stories about how he and Lee and Sandy, his partner, had conversations about poetry and music and, just wonderful, wonderful insights into Lee Krasner. But anyway, so these interviews have gone from soup to nuts, really. I won't mention who the nuts are, except, of course, myself. But, but they've really started out, I would say, with Arnie Glimcher, who is the head of Pace Gallery. And Arnie and his wife Millie are really friends of mine, so he was kind enough to let me interview him one day. And it was such a good interview, and he told me so much about Lee, who was one of his artists in his stable of artists at the Pace. He told me about Lee then, and it was so interesting that I asked him if I could come back and have a second interview. And I've done that with a couple of other people too. And they always are very forthcoming, and the stories are fascinating.
Wow. We're getting, there's a lot of people you've interviewed I want to talk about, but I also want to look, you brought some pictures, some of Lee's work that we want to show and talk about as well. So let's pull these up. This one's a self-portrait, is it?
Yes, isn't that
And when she's
lovely?
young?
Yeah. She was in her early 20s, probably 20 years old. And she did this actually down in her basement. You can see the basement window behind her with some trees outside, holding a little flower. And this was her first attempt at a realist self-portrait. Very sweet, beautiful young lady, right?
She looks very sweet here, too.
But even at this age, her mother told her that she was very rebellious. So even at that age, there was this edge to her. And if you go to the next picture, I think this is so fascinating because in the next portrait of her, done just
that's her
few
too?
months later, complete transformation, right?
You really see the rebellion in this.
Yes, you do. You do. The short cropped hair, the boy-looking bibbed overalls, the look of
even the
her
expression,
eyes,
yes.
looking at you like, don't
Don't mess with me.
Don't mess with me. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I love that portrait of her, and it really set the tone for her for the rest of her life. She was so amazingly, well, at least on the surface, self-confident. But then I found out later she had a lot of fears as well.
Well, I think, that's pretty normal, right?
Yeah.
So here we have, what's this
Oh,
one?
this is a wonderful story. It's a table. She did 2 of them after she and Jackson were married and came out.
So this
to
is the top of the
Springs.
table?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Jackson and Lee came out and lived in the Springs in 1945 in the same house that is now the Polly Krasner
Right.
Museum. It was so cold in their house that she decided she would have to work downstairs around a little heater. And in fact, I think Jackson suggested this. And they found a big wagon wheel, in fact, 2 of them in the barn. This is one of them. She made 2 tables, one in 47 and one in 48. And Jackson had worked at the WPA doing mosaics. And so these are the leftover mosaics that he didn't use. He brought them with them when they came out to Springs. He gave them to her and he said,
Make
use
something.
these.
Wow.
And so she absolutely used those. But not only are these the mosaics from the WPA, but also some of her jewelry, keys, coins, other found objects, which is interesting because Jackson at the same time was doing these paintings with a lot of found objects in them.
Mm-hmm.
And so her, they were kind of at the same point in time working simultaneously. One of these tables is owned by Alice Walton.
Now, but these they're basically collages? Is this her
Yes.
first? Is this her first foray into collages?
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not exactly her first, because she was a student of Hans Hofmann.
Ah.
And it seems that Hans Hofmann would criticize her work. I think even the first time he spoke to her, he took her drawing and tore it in half and threw it on the floor.
Oh, how cruel.
I know. But anyway, so I guess that's the kind of teacher he was, and she adored him and respected him tremendously.
Now, it's interesting because she did the same thing with her own work at one
I
point.
know. So exactly.
So she needed that kind of like a brutalness,
Right,
too.
right. She needed to really have that confrontation with her own work. And it started with Hans Hofmann, and then, of course, the table is very much a collage, but then the work that came after was absolutely brilliant.
Now, what motivated her to destroy her work originally when she destroyed it?
Well, one can only imagine. She says that she was disappointed in it, that it didn't live up to her standards. And many people have said that Lee Krasner had one of the great eyes, that she could tell a great work. And certainly with Pollock's work, she was very influential in bringing him along and supporting him. So in her own work, if she found paintings, drawings that she didn't like, she would tear them up and, just start all over again. But it worked for her.
Yeah, so, but it sounds like, again, what she did with Pollock, a controlling of the image that
Yes.
she's putting out there, so she doesn't want to put out anything that's less than perfect.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and this is an abstract?
Isn't this wonderful? Yes, well, most of her work is abstract, but this is a piece that I love and was in an exhibition that I helped curate in Washington at the Corcoran.
When was that?
It was, the show was in 1975, the year
cool.
after I lived with Lee. And it was a show of works on paper and these collages, which are huge. She would tear paper, paintings, whatever she could get her hands on, and glue them back on old canvases that she had even had in previous exhibitions but didn't like them. So it was a kind of a complete transformation from a previous year or 5 years or 10 years, and she would just continue on with that kind of pattern throughout her life.
And we have some more pictures. Let's.
There's one I'm hoping you'll
Oh.
That's a good one.
That's beautiful.
So that one's called Bald Eagle. And she actually did that before Jackson died. And I say that because if you see the white panels in there with the drip painting, guess whose paintings those were?
Oh.
They were his paintings. So he allowed her to use his cast-off canvases and drawings, and so she would use those in her own work.
She painted over them is what she did?
Well, in this case, she didn't paint over them. She
Used
tore
it.
them and used them. And they add quite a bit to the composition. But you can see how really energetic and
yes,
vibrant the work is.
It's a terrific piece.
Yeah,
it's
just
terrific.
gorgeous.
And we have a couple more. What's this one? Ooh.
Well, this is a mock-out, a study for a mural that she did. She did it actually after Jackson died with her nephew, whose name was Ronald Stein. And it was commissioned by a dear friend of hers and Jackson's, Bob Friedman. Bob Friedman ended up writing a book on Jackson Pollock, the first book on Jackson Pollock. So Bob was very wealthy. He owned a company called Urus, a real estate company in New York, but he loved the arts. So he asked Lee if she would create a mural.
And where does it live?
Well, go on and I'll show you how the mural looks today.
Oh, it's,
There it is.
Oh my God, where is
It's
that?
at 2 Broadway.
Oh, how
Yeah,
fabulous.
and it's still there, and it's actually on 2 sides of the building. It's a huge mural, and of course she, when she was with the WPA, worked on the mural project. So she worked big from the very beginning, but that was really huge. And she was very, very proud of that, although a little annoyed because of the unions. They didn't allow her to put the tesserae on herself on the wall. Therefore, they were all very flat, and she wanted it to be kind of at different angles so it would catch the light differently.
Yeah.
So anyway, she was a little disappointed, but it's a gorgeous piece, and it's still there after all these years.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
I'm going to have to go visit it. I
Yeah,
didn't even
2
know.
Broadway.
I'll definitely make that a trip of
It's
mine.
worth it.
So,
It really is.
believe it or not, the time goes fast. We
Yeah.
we have under 10 minutes.
Oh.
So, in your interviews, are you discovering what are you discovering that you didn't know about her that
Yeah.
is out of context of what you thought?
Well, one of the glorious things that I'm having the most fun with is that she, when I knew her, was very drab. She wore kind of old, tent-like house dresses. But it seems that she liked dressing up. She loved fashion. In fact, she was a good friend of Charles James, the fashion designer. And a gentleman in marketing, R. Corey Hay, is doing a book on Charles James. I met with him. He has all the original drawings that James did for Krasner, for a traveling outfit that she had, an ensemble. And then I dug into other stories about her. Well, she had her hair done at Kenneth. She was quite loved fur coats. So there was a time in her life when she was very glamorous. So I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder where that was in her earlier years. Well, I found some nude photographs of her taken by her earlier boyfriend, Igor, up in Provincetown. And she's gorgeous. And people often say, oh, Lee Krasner, she had this big nose and big, well, believe me, she was stunning. And also she was a model at a certain time in her life. So that was fun to find out that she had this love for the glamour life.
So that was definitely a dichotomy because what you presented, what she
Right.
presented to you was nothing like a
Totally.
glamorous person.
That's
It was
right.
like down to earth, and
Yeah.
and
Right,
and the
yeah.
pictures that I've seen of her, I would never have imagined her
Never, no.
glamming it up.
I can't wait for people
Let
to
alone
see
going to
these pictures.
Kenneth, right?
You know, isn't that great?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are there other dichotomies you found?
Well, the one that I'm most interested in actually is her psychological health. I had always thought that that Jackson was the one who was going to the psychiatrist and
The
getting
dark one.
the dark one, and now I've discovered that Lee Krasner was as well, perhaps not to the extent that Jackson was, because he was an alcoholic. But she started going to various shrinks even before he passed away. And also now realizing, as I'm sure many people do, that she felt extremely guilty because when he died in the car crash, she was in Europe and so was not here to kind of care for him. And I think she always...
But he died before she got back, right?
Yes, in a car
Yeah,
crash.
but she couldn't have cared for him, really, right?
Well, I think psychologically she always thought that
So
she
she
was
put it on herself, is
protecting
what I'm
him.
getting at.
Yes, that's right. But anyway, the pattern of psychiatry is one now that I've discovered that many of the other artists that lived out here, you know, Motherwell, Still, Osorio, all of these artists also had psychiatrists. So it was like a thing that they all did. And I have one note from one of her earlier psychiatrists, a guy named Len Siegel, and it came from his daughter who lives in Australia. But I'm trying to find out more. So if anyone knew Len Siegel,
Can you hear this, everybody? If anybody knows Len Siegel, get to us.
let me know. Call me.
How do you reach Ruth? What is it?
Well, I have a website for Lee Krasner. It's Lee Krasner at Outlook.com.
So it's Lee Krasner at Outlook.com.
Right.
You can communicate with
Yeah,
Ruth.
yeah.
Because you got rid of your book agent and you got a publisher.
Right.
And you got a publisher from Milan.
I know,
That
isn't
does
that
all the stuff
lovely?
for the Louvre. That's really...
Isn't that fantastic?
That's exciting.
I know it. Well,
And tell us his name. I know what
the
this...
Officio Libreria.
It's better than I could do.
Yeah. And, I got to know them through Guildhall. They did the Motherwell catalog with Phyllis Tuckman and the Liechtenstein catalog for Guildhall, and they're wonderful to work
wow.
with, and they do distribution all over the world. So ostensibly, every museum in the world will have this book.
Oh, how cool. That's so clever of you.
Well-
Dispense with the agent, go right to the publisher. It's very smart.
Well,
I like it.
I had a meeting with him when I was in Rome, and he was so kind and thoughtful. And as it turns out, his distributor is a gentleman named John Brancotti, who used to have East End Books here in East Hampton. And John is now ACC distributor, so he is working with us too. And I need to mention, I have a wonderful editor now, whose name is Barbara McAdam, who writes for Art News, and an assistant whose name is Jaylene Lawler that I couldn't do without. So we're now the Krasner team.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah, we've definitely kind of blended our talents in a way that it's tremendously helpful
Oh,
and
how
exciting.
fabulous. It's
Yeah.
good. This is going to be really terrific. Now, we have less than 3 minutes, so I just want to... Ruth is going to come back. We're going to do a series on her book as it develops. So this is the second episode. And her book is going to be published in May of 2019 is the goal. And it's going to coincide with a really important exhibition in London. What's the name of it again? Help me out.
The Barbican Gallery and in London, and then it's going from there to Bern, Frankfurt, and then Bilbao. So in 2020, in May 2020, it will be at Bilbao in Spain.
Oh, wow.
We all have to go.
Oh, okay. So you're on for that. So 2020, well, we're going to be in Spain.
Yes, that's
Okay,
right.
2000, I'll look forward to it. Barry, you
too.
hear that? 2020, we're going to Spain.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Now, we have a very little. Oh, you know, we have a little bit of time. Let's not delve into the interviews. Let's just show.
Okay.
You're teaching a class.
Yeah.
Let's show these pictures.
Well,
we have 2 minutes just to show you some pictures. Tell us what you
Well,
did.
I just wanted to say that now that I have a passion for Lee Krasner, I've discovered that others have an interest in her as well, and I was invited to the York School. It's a preschool in New York City, where my grandchildren are going to school there. And I taught a class, in fact 2, about Lee Krasner to 5-year-olds. And it was so much fun.
We have 1 minute, and we have a couple of pictures just of you teaching
Yeah.
the grandchildren. It's so cute. Look at this.
So the little girl's name is Harper Edelstein, and the little boy is Nathan Edelstein, and they're twins. And it was such a joy to do that class. I'm offering my services.
There's another one.
Yeah, isn't that great? So,
So you're going to keep doing this?
well, whenever invited.
Whenever. Aw.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Yes.
Very proud of those kids.
So we will continue next. We'll come
Good.
back and, I don't know, give you a few months.
Yeah, please.
And we'll talk about more of the interviews that you're
Okay.
doing. Is there anything you want to say in 30 seconds that I didn't hit?
Just go to my blog. It's raarts.net for a lot more information. And our previous interview is on there as well.
Oh, cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming.
Loved
It's
being
been
here.
a pleasure.
Thank
we love
you.
you very much.